Bear. Season 2 is out and they have some fantastic dishes. Omelette by Sydney, that's sort of blowing up the internet everywhere that you look now. Bolognese that Carmy makes, which is a great home cook meets fancy chef recipe. And of course, we've got the savory cannoli, the Michael that Marcus makes. Today's episode, we're gonna make 3 dishes from the bear. We're gonna start off with the omelette. So this is a typical French omelet, but there's a couple of twists in it. This actually uses cheese. I think it's boursin? Du boursin. I don't exactly know how to say that properly. Correct me in the comments if you know better. Sort of a whipped cream cheese that comes from Normandy, France. I think it's fantastic, but I couldn't find it where I live. I went to like 5 different stores and for some reason, no one had it. I found this, which looks pretty close. You can see it's cheese, it's sort of a cream cheese, a whipped cream cheese. So I'm gonna use this. Let's start making a French omelet. So I'm gonna start with my fake boursin cheese, and we're gonna move that into a piping bag. I don't actually have a piping bag, so I use these freezer bags, put everything in there. I'm gonna use a bench scraper just to get everything into the corner, and we'll set that aside. One of the big things that Sydney does while she's making the omelets is she uses a fine mesh sieve to strain the eggs while she's beating them. I've never done this before. I'm not really sure what the point is. It might make the eggs a little fluffier. She does it, so we're gonna do it as well. Last but not least, we're gonna get our garnish ready. This comes together really, really quickly, so we wanna have everything set up before we start. Just got some chives here. I'm gonna really finely mince these and set them aside. Now, I need a non-stick pan. Non-stick is really, really important for this recipe, and then a couple of tablespoons of butter. This is a French recipe. There is no shortage of butter. Add our eggs into the pan and swirl around the eggs until they form a soft curd. Like I said, I'm gonna snip off my piping bag and pipe the boursin right into the dish. Then once the eggs are basically set on the bottom, I'm gonna start rolling them over. It's still gonna be really quite wet, that's what we want, and then fold over both sides until it sort of forms a torpedo shape, and then we can move on to our plating dish. Just gonna move it down to the bottom edge of the pan and turn it onto my plate. Don't worry if it doesn't look great at this point. You can shape it as much as you want. I'm gonna garnish this with some of those chives that I chopped. The thing that Sydney uses that I haven't seen before is potato chips. She uses, I think, sour cream and onion potato chips. These are just plain. I think they're just gonna do the job as well. And that's it. This is Sydney's omelet. Let's give it a try. So you can see, maybe you can't see, let's spin this around. So it's still really, really creamy on the center. The cheese is making it look a little creamier than it is as well. The cheese is a little different than the boursin. It's close, but I think it'd be even better if we had that. The crunch from the potato chips, just awesome. You know, I've had this kind of omelet before. I absolutely love it. Let's move on to the next recipe. I'm gonna finish this first though. So we've got 2 more recipes to go through in season 2 of The Bear. Let's move on to the bolognese. There's a whole episode called Bolognese. Carmy makes this bolognese sauce at home for his girlfriend. We're gonna get inspiration from Marcella Hazan's recipe for bolognese sauce. Very, very authentic, and I think this is the way that Carmy would make it. It really relies on a lot of great technique, simple ingredients. So let's make Carmy's bolognese. To make this bolognese, we are going to start off with a sofrito. That's celery, carrots, and onion. We're gonna cut all these down, but no one wants to see me do that, so let's use the magic of television. And then we're gonna set a large pot over our burner and melt some butter and some neutral flavored oil. Yes, butter, even though this is Italian, there's some butter in it. We're gonna start off by sauteing the onions until they're translucent. We cook the onions first because they cook at a different rate than the carrots and the celery. After about 5 minutes, they'll look something like this. Now that the onions are translucent, we can add the rest of our vegetables. And cook them for about a minute or 2 until they're covered in the oil. Now I'm using a mixture of pork and beef here. You could use just beef if you wanted, but the pork adds a little bit of something different to it. Season it lightly with salt and black pepper, mix it around, and then add some milk. Milk is really important, and it's what makes this a bolognese sauce as opposed to just a ragu. Let that simmer down, add a little bit of nutmeg to season it up a bit, let it simmer for a few minutes, see it's completely dissolved, and then we're gonna add in some white wine. While that simmers, let's talk about the tomatoes. Bolognese sauce is a meat sauce, not a tomato sauce. There has to be a lot more meat in it than there is tomato. One of my biggest pet peeves is you get a bolognese sauce and it's a tomato sauce. Meat first. We're only gonna add just a really, really small amount of tomatoes to this, and then we're gonna simmer it for a really, really long time. You might think there's not enough tomato in this, but trust me, there is. And if the sauce gets a little too thick while it's simmering, we can add a little bit of water. So when you see the authentic recipes for bolognese sauce, you'll see a shockingly small amount of tomatoes. So let's get back in the kitchen. The white wine has almost completely reduced. Add in our tomatoes. Like I said, it's a small can of tomatoes. I'm going to use the edge of my wooden spoon to break down the tomatoes. You don't need to go too far here. This is going to cook for a long time. They will break down. So after 3 hours of simmering, you've got something that's really, really thick. and the fat is separating away from the sauce. Set that aside and we can start working on our pasta. Get some water and bring it to a boil. We're gonna use bucatini. I love bucatini noodles because they have this little hole in the center. It's a little hard to see, but sauce is gonna go in there and it's gonna make it taste even better. Our water is almost at a boil. Let's make sure to heavily salt it and then break our pasta in half.
No, God, please, no!
No, I'm just joking. Don't worry. Not actually gonna break it in half. It says to cook it for 6 minutes. I'm gonna do it for a little less. I'll show you why in a second. Before we drain the pasta, we need to save a bit of the pasta water. This stuff is like liquid gold and it's gonna help us make our sauce. We're gonna finish cooking this in a pan. That's why we slightly undercooked it. Add my bolognese into the pan, set it over medium heat or so, and add some of the pasta water that we set aside. Once that starts coming to a boil, add in some olive oil and some Parmesan cheese. Stir it all together. This is gonna emulsify in the pan. And then add my bucatini pasta. Toss everything around so it's coated. It's a little loose. You can add some more pasta water and then we can plate this up. Carmy plated this relatively simply, just basically twirling the pasta onto a plate. Add a bit more sauce if you want, and really who doesn't? A little Parmesan cheese, and here we go. We've got our bucatini bolognese. Let's give this a try. It's awesome. The flavor from the bolognese sauce is really deep after 3 hours of simmering. The bucatini noodles are really, really big, and they've got that hole in the center, so there's sauce even in the center. This is a fantastic dish, and I think it's the way Carmy would make it. So our third recipe, we're gonna get really chefy. When Marcus comes back from Copenhagen, he's learned a whole bunch of new skills. This is one that really stood out to me. It's a savory cannoli.
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I love cannolis. I eat them all the time when I'm in Italy, but they're usually sweet, right? They're filled with mascarpone cheese and they've got pistachios on them. This is a savory cannoli. I'm pretty sure that they said they used a mortadella cream in the center of this. So I've got some mortadella here and I'm gonna cut this down into sort of equal sized pieces because I'm going to turn it into a filling by blending this with some milk and some cream. Set the chopped mortadella aside for a second, and then I'm gonna use my immersion blender. This might be easier in one of those high powered Vitamix style blenders. This is what I have. I'm gonna start blending this on medium speed. It's not really blending, but I'm gonna add a little bit of whole milk in there, and then it really starts to blend really quite nicely. Once that's all blended, I'm going to move into a bowl and pass that through a sieve. This is a chefy type recipe. Almost everything's gonna pass through a sieve at some point in order to make it chefy. Also, this is gonna remove some of the lumps that didn't get blended. So now into an ice bath. I want this to cool down. The blender is gonna heat it up a bit. I want this to set, so I'll set that aside to cool off for a few minutes. I've also got some heavy cream here that I'm going to whip to medium peaks or so, and once that gets up to medium peaks, I'm gonna add it into my mortadella and milk mixture. Binging with Babish did this on his channel and it looked like it was working out really well, so that's where the inspiration for this comes from. Season with a bit of salt, pepper, and nutmeg. Give it one final mix, and this is ready to go into a piping bag. Just pour everything into that Ziploc freezer bag, push it all into one end, and this is gonna go into the fridge while we do the rest of our components. It looked like on the bottom there was a tapenade, so I'm gonna use some black olives and put that into the bowl of a food processor, a little bit of olive oil, some lemon juice, some whole anchovies that have been packed in oil, some capers, some garlic, and the lid goes on my food processor. Just blend that until everything starts to come together. We still want some chunks in there, but everything should be in a paste form. Next, we need the outside, which is a Parmesan crisp. Got some Parmesan cheese that I'm gonna mix with some cornstarch. So this is gonna help everything stay together and so no air pockets to form. Mix it all by hand so that everything is combined. I'm gonna move this onto a parchment-lined baking dish because these are gonna go into the oven. I'm gonna use some ring molds to make sure everything is a nice perfect circle. Push my Parmesan cheese and cornstarch mixture into the ring molds, tap it down lightly, carefully take off the ring mold, and then this is going in the oven. They've started to set. Got something that looks like it's gonna wrap around the Parmesan crisp and turn it into that cannoli shape. I wanna move quickly here because these will set very quickly. Gonna cool for a couple of minutes and then pull the mold off. And I'm actually pretty surprised. This looks really good. This one, not so much, but we've at least got one. That's what we need for this episode. Last thing that we need is some pistachios, which go on the ends of the cannoli. I'm going to de-shell these. Once you've got enough in the mortar and pestle, just crack those so that they are ground pistachios. We're gonna move that onto a dish, and now it's time to assemble. Look how good this looks. I'm pretty impressed with myself. This is my first time making these Parmesan crisps. I'm gonna pipe in the mortadella cream, dip the edges just as you would a sort of typical cannoli in the pistachio, and it's time to plate these up. The tapenade goes on the bottom, sort of make a little well in the center so the cannoli can fit right on top. And then I've got some salmon roe that I found at the grocery store that looks like what they put on top. Drizzle it with a bit of olive oil, and there we go, a savory cannoli. So it's a little bit bigger than I think they do on the show, but the smaller ones that I had weren't closing. I mean, it still looks pretty good. Pretty happy with this Parmesan crisp. It turned out really well. Most importantly, let's give it a try. Usually I just eat cannolis with my hands, but I think we need a fork and knife. really tastes a lot like mortadella. I think it would be better if it was a little bit smaller. It's sort of a little overpowering. It's still really good. Certainly one of the best looking dishes on the show. This is the cannoli. So that's it for the bear. Those are my 3 favorite recipes. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, smash the like button below. Really helps out the channel. If you have other dishes that you loved in the bear, jump down in the comments. Let me know what else you like. Subscribe if you want to see more videos. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Feel like I should have a Taylor Swift song playing.
Is now a good time to talk about those Taylor Swift tickets?
I love Taylor Swift too. I just needed a break.
This channel can't afford that.